December 2024 marked a turning point in Syria's tormented history. President Bashar al-Assad, once seemingly invincible, was overthrown. His regime, accused of countless atrocities, finally crumbled under the weight of its own brutality. HTS, a group designated as terrorists by the United States, seized this opportunity. They stormed through the ravaged nation, filling the void left by Assad's fall. Ahmed al-Sharaa, the leader of HTS, declared himself interim president, promising a new era for Syria. The world watched, holding its breath as this new chapter unfolded. But the promised dawn soon descended into darkness. The overthrow of Assad did not usher in peace. Instead, it unleashed a wave of violence that swept across the nation. Minorities, particularly Alawites who had been loyal to Assad, became targets. Fear gripped those who had found a precarious safety under the previous regime. The world, once again, looked on in horror as Syria descended further into chaos. The international community reacted with a mixture of condemnation and cautious diplomacy. The UN Secretary-General, along with European leaders, engaged with al-Sharaa, seeking a peaceful resolution. The United States, through Secretary of State Marco Rubio, condemned the violence but stopped short of direct intervention. Turkey, a powerful neighbor with its own interests in the region, expressed support for Syria's new government, further complicating the situation. Amidst these geopolitical maneuvers, the Syrian people suffered. The echoes of gunfire and the cries of the displaced became the soundtrack to their lives. The world, accustomed to Syria's suffering, seemed unable or unwilling to intervene effectively. The cycle of violence once again spun out of control, leaving devastation in its wake. The violence that followed Assad's fall was not random. It was targeted, brutal, and relentless. Alawites, the sect to which Assad belonged, bore the brunt of the attacks. They were hunted down, their homes destroyed, their communities ripped apart. The death toll mounted with horrifying speed. Estimates varied, but all pointed to a systematic campaign of violence directed at this vulnerable group. Christians, too, found themselves caught in the crosshairs. While the exact number of casualties remained unclear, reports emerged of killings, looting, and destruction targeting Christian communities. The coastal regions, home to a significant Christian population, became theaters of violence. Fear stalked the streets as stories of atrocities spread, driving communities further into fear and despair. The brutality was not confined to large-scale attacks. Individual stories emerged, adding a human face to the statistics of violence. Tony and Fadi Petrus, a father and son from an evangelical church in Latakia, were brutally murdered. In Banias, the father of Father Gregorios Bishara, a respected priest, met a similar fate. These accounts, whispered from one terrified community to another, painted a grim picture of life under HTS rule. The international community, despite its pronouncements of concern, seemed powerless to stop the carnage. Sanctions and condemnations rang hollow in the face of such raw violence. The Syrian people, abandoned by the world, were left to face their fate alone. The hope that had flickered briefly with the fall of Assad was extinguished, replaced by the cold reality of a new reign of terror. A crucial question arose amidst the chaos. Were Christians specifically targeted in this new wave of violence? The answer was complex, shrouded in the fog of war and fueled by conflicting narratives. Some argued that the attacks on Christians were deliberate, part of a systematic campaign of religious cleansing. They pointed to the specific incidents, the desecrated churches, and the fear that stalked Christian communities as evidence of a targeted campaign. Former French Prime Minister François Fillon, among others, lent his voice to these claims. He spoke of a systematic operation aimed at eliminating Alawite and Christian populations. His words carried weight, adding to the growing international concern about the fate of Christians in Syria. The world, still haunted by the spectre of ISIS and its persecution of minorities, watched with a sense of déjà vu. Others, however, offered a different perspective. They argued that Christians, while undoubtedly victims of the violence, were not specifically targeted. They suggested that the attacks were a consequence of proximity. Christian communities, often residing near Alawite strongholds, were caught in the crossfire of a conflict primarily aimed at Assad loyalists. Archbishop Jacques Mourad of Homs, himself a survivor of violence, argued that Christians were collateral victims, their suffering a tragic consequence of their geographical location. Vincent Gillot of L'Œuvre d'Orient echoed this sentiment, emphasizing the need to avoid inflaming tensions with accusations of targeted persecution. The truth, they argued, lay in understanding the complex dynamics of the conflict, rather than resorting to simplistic narratives. The debate over whether Christians were specifically targeted highlighted a crucial challenge in conflict reporting: the difficulty of discerning truth amidst the fog of war. Conflicting narratives, often fueled by political agendas and the desire to control the narrative, made it difficult to form a clear picture of events on the ground. The situation in Syria was further complicated by the involvement of multiple actors, each with their own interests and motivations. The Syrian government, under HTS control, had a vested interest in downplaying any sectarian dimension to the violence. International actors seeking to justify intervention or inaction often promoted narratives that served their own geopolitical goals. In this environment of uncertainty, clarity was paramount. It was essential to acknowledge the suffering of all victims, regardless of their religious or ethnic background. At the same time, it was crucial to avoid fueling the flames of sectarianism by making unsubstantiated claims of targeted persecution. The conflict in Syria, with its complex web of actors and motivations, served as a stark reminder of the importance of responsible reporting. It underscored the need to prioritize facts over speculation, to give voice to all sides of the story, and to approach complex issues with nuance and sensitivity. Ultimately, the pursuit of truth, however elusive, remained the most powerful weapon against the forces of hatred and division.